a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. There are a few of you out there that think Christmas is over for the year. Not so much. Christmas is actually running until Three Kings Day. It is supposed to be the time from Jesus' birth until those 3 wise guys, or men, showed up. You do know about the 3 wise women. They arrived the next day with diapers, formula, and toys. If you see me running around town, I'll still be wishing everybody a Merry Christmas, right up until we eat that round bread thingy. I wish my family would do away with that chocolate drink that never tastes all that good as far as I'm concerned. Instead, we should have coffee. Coffee, but not just any coffee. Organic Man Coffee Trike Coffee. The best coffee in the universe. If you live in or near Laredo, head on over to 4501 McPherson and find out what real coffee tastes like. If it's too far, you can still treat yourself by going to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Christmas and ghosts. They just don't seem to go together. Halloween and ghosts, yes. Christmas? It's not what you would expect. Way back when things were rotten, once the winter months rolled in, life went from hard to near impossible. The food you ate was what you had squirreled away. Hunting was a 50-50 proposition. The animals you were hunting were also hunting you back. You got used to eating the produce that was going bad, but not bad enough to throw away. Sitting around the fire deep in your own thoughts, you had only a few things to do for entertainment. One of these being the old guy that knew stories. Too old to hunt and too tough to send out to check on the saber-toothed tigers. This was the person who knew stories. Being the old guy, he would tell stories to keep all the young kids awake so he could sleep without worrying about the saber-toothed tigers. Until the invention of TV and families gathered around to watch Hallmark movies, my favorite being Grumpy Cat's Christmas, folks could get lost in a good book or sit around the den telling stories. Since it was dark out and it stayed dark, people began telling scary stories to make life interesting. Probably the crazy uncle making it impossible for the kids to sleep, because that's what we do. As time marched on, life got a little better. Food was stored that could last the winter, and some of it actually tasted okay. Families would get together to celebrate, eat too much, and spend the rest of the evening telling more scary stories. Once more, this was probably that weird uncle making life interesting for the kids. 1843, Chuck Dickens, man, that sounds bad. Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol. It was kind of a feel good story with a whole lot of horror mixed in. Back then, what passed for horror was kind of mediocre by today's standards. The ghosts were scary enough for kids to believe if they didn't act right, there would be a reckoning. The version I like best, of course, is Scrooged. When Carol Kane grabbed Bill Murray by the lip, she actually tore some of the skin loose inside his mouth. That look on Murray's face wasn't acting. He was in pain. Christmas season was a time when dark legends surfaced and scary stories were to be told. Especially true in the Victorian times when the art of telling ghost stories was perfected. Christmas arrives at the darkest, coldest time of the year. My nephew has a wood stove and a generator. He knows how to survive. We have street lights and homes have electricity most of the time. I see some blackouts hit the north again. Too many folks are content to sit back and let the government keep them alive until the government finds other things to do, like steal all your money or invite invaders into our country. Anyone willing to place their survival in the hands of a bunch of politicians who haven't a clue on how things are done, well, you're going to get what you paid for. Not much. On cold and dark nights, our minds tend to wander to unsettling things. Things like ghosts. Across Europe, the winter folklore reflected this unsettling time of the year. Krampus, you know that guy? The one that precedes Santa by a few days and takes out all the bad kids. Well, that was a scary story, and it still may be today. The Wild Hunt that was led by ghostly figures like Odin and Herne the Hunter was said to thunder through the winter skies, dragging lost souls with them. These were not cheerful tales, they were warnings. Winter was not a season to let your guard down. By the Victorian era, these ancient fears hadn't disappeared, they'd simply moved indoors. Gas lamps replaced torches. Fireplaces became the heart of the home. Families gathered at night when the world outside was enveloped in darkness. Without a television or radio, the long evening had to be filled somehow, and a lot of times this fell on the weird uncle to do. The best way to scare someone is not by showing them a monster. It's by letting them think about a monster. Like in the movie Jaws, the shark is seldom seen, but when you hear that music, your mind creates a monster shark far more terrifying than anything Hollywood studios could ever invent. If they ever do remake Jaws, they are going to ruin that movie. Because they're going to have a big old CGI shark, and you're no longer going to envision a monster. You're just going to look at it and go, monster shark. Theater of the mind is far more scary than theater of the eyeballs. Watching a movie, everything is dished up for you. You don't have to do any of the work. Reading a book or listening to a story, your mind gets involved in creating the characters and the situations. The art of storytelling is quickly vanishing from our world. People don't sit around by a fire and allow one person to send them into another world using just words and imagination. By doing a Christmas ghost show, I'm hoping to keep at least a bit of the activity alive. The hard part for me is finding some good ghost stories I haven't already told. The internet is getting more jammed up with all the advertising and nonsense as the people in charge allow anyone to pretend to be telling the truth. I looked for paranormal stories only to find some clown selling cars who paid to have his company listed anytime the word paranormal is typed into the search. Last night I was watching some scary locations in Texas. That's what it said, in Texas, that folks wanted to avoid. They showed one town in Michigan. Now, I know Texas is big, but we don't extend up into Michigan. They had another town that was out in California. Now, I looked back at the name of the show, and it was Scary Locations in Texas. Hmm. Well, I guess the person that was doing the show had no idea what they were talking about. I stopped watching the show even though I was maybe a halfway through it. Well, clickbait, I guess, is what it's called. There's a name for people like this, but I try to do a family friendly show, so I'm not going to use it. You can think about it, though. There are the writers who tell a really good story and pretend it's true, while at the same time it's all just made up. If the story is fiction, go for it. Tell a scary story. But tell us you just made it up. It will actually enhance your standing because this means you're a really good writer as opposed to just being a liar. If all you want to do is lie, get into politics and do it professionally. Don't try to convince us that a story is true when you simply dreamed the whole thing up. Is it dreamed or dreamt? The trouble with the English language is it kind of changes once in a while. All of the following stories are true, as far as I know. The people that I interviewed had no reason to lie, and they sure aren't getting rich telling them to anybody like me. I put them in a book and I sell a few copies, and hopefully it keeps the lights on, and that's about it. Here in Laredo, there is a technical medical training facility. You can learn to be a pharmacy technician or a medical assistant. The building used to be a physical therapy center at one time. The students and staff have seen some odd things during school hours and after school hours. Some of the staff say they have seen a huge black shadow being. It looks like somebody's shadow, only there's nobody there to cast it. The shadow is said to be nearly 7 feet tall. It is seen in all the different parts of the building. They also hear the lids of trash cans being opened and swinging back and forth when there's nobody in that part of the building. Ghosts throwing away their trash, I guess. Jacob and Michael are two of three brothers who are members of the cleaning staff. Their jobs keep them there after everybody else has gone home. Jacob told me he was mopping the floor in the south end of the building. He began to feel sick. His head was swimming and he felt nauseous. He was about finished and he tried to push on, had to finish the job. As he was moving towards the front door, he saw a man come from around the corner. The man was tall, and he looked in very bad shape. His head was kind of held to one side, and as if his neck was broken. His back was bent, and he looked as if he was having a hard time walking. Jacob looked at the man, wondering where did he come from. The building was all locked. That end of the building was empty. He'd just mopped every room. As Jacob watched, the man faded from view. One night Jacob was locking up for the night, and he checked every door, and then he set the alarms. He punched in the code, and the box said, "Alarm set," followed by "Back door open." Jacob knew the doors were all shut and locked, but he had to go look anyway. He disarmed the alarm and went to check all the doors and windows again. They were all locked. Jacob quickly set the alarm and ran out the front door. On another occasion, Michael was cleaning up the north end of the building. He was working his way back towards the front desk. As he worked, he felt as if somebody was standing right behind him. He would turn around quickly, but there was nobody there. This feeling followed him all the way to the front desk. This was when Michael saw a man standing in the doorway to one of the classrooms. The figure had to duck in order to get under the doorframe. The man was visible for 3 or 4 seconds, and then he simply vanished. Michael was cleaning the women's bathroom. He had to replace the paper rolls and empty the trash can and mop the floor. As he was working, it sounded as if somebody was in the last stall. You know, banging the lid, moving around, making noises that you make when you're finished doing what you've been doing. One of the stall doors swung open. Then it swung shut. There was nobody in the room other than Michael. The little girl has been seen by a lot of the folks who work at the school. Most only catch a quick glimpse of her moving around. Michael was standing at the front desk when he saw a girl run around to the far corner. He saw her hair in a red dress, and it went around the corner rather quickly. The top of the head was about 4 feet, maybe 4.5 feet up off the floor. He walked to the corner and looked, but there was nobody there. The two brothers both hear people whispering in the empty classrooms. During a ghost hunt, the equipment has a tendency to fail more often than not. The theory is that spirits will draw energy from electrical devices in order to feed themselves. Since they don't eat food to get energy, they have to get it from somewhere. One place that is bursting with energy is a school. Kids have too much energy, and most of the schools today keep them under control. And all that energy is just simmering inside those bodies. Kind of like having a building filled with batteries ready to be unleashed. This may explain why many schools are home to spirits or ghosts. When interviewing folks who work in schools, one thing was very common: not to mention the school's name. This came down to me from the folks in charge. They said it was okay to interview the staff and the teachers, just leave the names out. I could talk to everybody, which was pretty cool. I kind of felt like I was back in high school and I was in trouble again when I had to go talk to the principal, but I got through it. 4:30 in the afternoon, the employees at a school were all signing out for the day. They would file past the front desk and say their goodbyes before heading out the door. As several of them were at the desk at the same time, the door to the assistant principal's office began to make noise. It sounded as if somebody was trying to open the door. The assistant principal had been gone for the day, and the door was locked. The handle was jiggling up and down, and the door was rattling in the frame. For safety reasons, these doors were designed that even when they're locked from the outside, you can still open them from the inside. This way you don't accidentally get locked in. Several employees all stood there looking at the door as it rattled, wondering what was going on. Getting the pass key, one of them unlocked the door to help the person out, if it was a person. As the door swung open, they could all see there was nobody in the room. It didn't take very long to look in every corner of the office. This was a brand new building. It had no history of such things, but there it was, right in the middle of the day. Later, it was learned that several times the custodial staff had heard children in the hallway after everybody had gone home. There was no explanation as to what or who they were hearing, so they tended to try to ignore it. A substitute teacher was getting ready for the day. The first class was at 9:30, so he sat down at the desk and checked over the day's assignments. As he sat there, the sound of banging started coming from the wall at the far side of the room. The substitute walked over to the wall to try to figure out what was making all that noise. Could it be some kid outside behaving wrong, banging on the side of the building with something? This was an outside wall, and the sound was definitely coming from the wall. As he stood there listening, the wires attached to a set of headphones began moving back and forth, as if somebody was swinging it in their hand. This was getting a bit weird. The substitute was looking at the wire when he noticed the door to the room swung open. He figured somebody was about to come in, and he walked to the front of the classroom, only to find there was nobody there. The receptionist's desk was just outside his room, so the substitute stepped out the door and asked her if anybody had come into his classroom. The receptionist said that no, there had been nobody in the hallway for some time now. As the substitute was sitting back at his desk, the door swung open once more, and once more there was nobody there. He decided he needed to stay out of that classroom until the students arrived, so he walked up and down the hallways until about 9:25. He found out later a student on the basketball team had tripped while running down the stairs, fell, breaking her neck. She died at the bottom of the stairs, real close to his classroom. Kids can be messy, and the teachers don't have time to clean up after each day's activities. The task is handled by the district custodians. There's the day shift that comes in just before the kids arrive, and they clean up any spills or accidents that happen during classroom hours. The evening shift clean each room and they take out the trash. Some finish at 9 or 10 o'clock, depending on the school they're working at and how messy the place is. One teacher began complaining that his room wasn't being cleaned. He would come in before his students arrived to find a bigger mess than what had been there when everybody left. It's hard enough to wrangle a room full of kids without having to worry about picking up before they get there. Each morning, the teacher would arrive to find all the desks had been pushed to the center of the room, and the chairs were piled on top. There would be trash strewn over the floor. He had to quickly pull the chairs down, rearrange the desks before the kids arrived. After complaining to the front office several times, he was told the custodians were indeed cleaning his room. Their supervisor even would come by and check. The room was spotless before the cleaning staff left. The building was then locked, and nobody was in until the next morning. The desks and the chairs were in their usual place the following day, and trash was everywhere. Other teachers finally told this man that he was having trouble that other people had had before. That one classroom was always a mess, no matter how much they cleaned it. He decided it was time to get a different job, and he went on looking for something else. In Laredo, we have two school districts: Laredo Independent School District and United Independent School District. There are also many private schools, along with several Catholic schools. One school, near Bridge 2 at the end of Interstate 35, people report seeing a nun walking along the hallway on the second floor. She walks over to the doors that lead into the library, and then she walks right through the doors without opening them. The building is old, but the library is a new addition. It was put in after the nuns were no longer working at the school. Still, the spirit of the nun seems to be looking for something in the library. Nobody knows for sure what had been there before the library was built. Several teachers and a few students have seen the nun on the second floor hallway. The janitor has also witnessed this spirit walking the corridors of the school. The image has been caught on tape as a glowing orb moving along the hall and vanishing through doors. This school had been opened in 1950. It was one of a number of schools built through the efforts of Cardinal McIntyre. At first, the school had nobody to run it until the Sisters of Columbine, something like that, said they would come to Laredo and staff the building. The nuns continued working at the school until the 90s. He used to have family that lived right across the street from this school. They would gather there for family parties. Late one night, Eddie and a group of his cousins were standing outside on the street. It was almost midnight when a young girl walked up to them. This young girl looked to be about 14 years old. She had on ratty-looking blue dress and sandals. Her hair was a rat's nest of tangles. Everything about her looked wrong. She looked like she had just crawled out of a grave. The girl asked the young men, "How do I get to the cemetery?" This was just what these young guys did not need to hear. Almost as one, they turned and ran for the house. The girl had vanished when they looked back to see where she was. She wasn't walking down the street, and there was nothing for her to duck down behind. People say they hear flute music coming from the music rooms in one of the older high schools. Now, this is common enough that most folks simply ignore it. The story behind the haunted music is that a student was practicing for a recital late one night. As she sat there playing her flute, she suffered an aneurysm, a burst blood vessel in the brain. The ambulance was called and the student was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't make it to the ER. People believe her spirit is now hanging out in the last place that she remembers when she was living. No one ever sees the flute player, but they hear her all the time. One of the oldest high schools in Laredo used to have a gun range in the basement under the floor of the gym. Kids would learn proper firearms handling using 22 caliber rifles. Sometime back in the 50s, one of the students was accidentally shot. He died from his wounds. Someone wasn't paying attention to the safety rules. What do you expect when you have a bunch of kids that, well, there's a clown in every group? The gun range was closed and the room under the gym was turned into storage. People going down there to put things in storage or to retrieve them hear sounds of somebody moving around back in the far corner. The shuffling of footsteps and the scraping of boxes being dragged across the floor. Anybody that goes to see who's back there will find out they are alone in that room. The sound stops as soon as they get close to it. Some try to explain this away as being rats or other intruding animals, but the school is checked on a regular basis for any of this sort of thing. The door is locked and there are no windows to gain entry. The sound is heard by so many people that they all just try to ignore it and get in and out of the storeroom as quickly as possible. Although not a school, there used to be student housing on Guadalupe Street. Before the students moved in, the building had been a convent. It sat right across the street from a Catholic church. Previous to the nuns living in the building, it had been a big mansion. There was a pool and tennis courts on the property. It was quite a substantial property. It filled the entire block. The students were somewhat afraid of running into a nun in the hallway. Late at night, when venturing to the bathroom or coming up the stairs, the women staying at the mansion would run into a nun dressed in an old-fashioned style habit. As she would move about in the darkness, not making a sound. Students would be startled to encounter her late at night. She never seemed aware of being seen by anyone. She just walked down the hall en route to some unknown destination. The students had little to fear from what sounds like a residual haunting. There was never any interaction. Running into an unknown entity can scare folks. The old mansion convent was torn down and a set of businesses put up in its place. The people working there told me that they have never seen anything unexplained. Maybe the ghost nun has moved on. With the advancement of technology, the schools began using cameras to keep an eye on things. Should somebody misbehave, there would be a record of what had happened. After hours, the cameras are used to make sure that nobody breaks in and tries to steal or damage anything. On many occasions, the security people monitoring these cameras have seen a child walking along the hallway in one of the schools. On a few occasions, this has happened while the custodians are cleaning. The security guard would contact the custodians using two-way radio and ask them to check on this intruder. On one occasion, the guard called saying he could see a little girl in the hall. The custodians arrived and they didn't see anyone. The security guard told them the child is standing right next to y'all. The image was visible on the monitor, but not to the people right there. This did nothing to make the cleaning staff feel like working late into the night. They quickly moved to a different part of the building and finished their duties and left. There were cemeteries all over Laredo, around the outskirts. As the town grew, the cemeteries all became part of the municipality. The folks running things didn't want to have dozens of cemeteries located all over the place, occupying a valuable land that could be used for other things. So, on many occasions, they consolidated all of these cemeteries into either the city cemetery or the Catholic cemetery right across the street. At the intersection of Moctezuma and San Eduardo, there used to be an old cemetery way back before Laredo was just a small settlement. 1942, the bodies were removed. They were relocated. Well, most of the bodies. Some folks say that most of the former inhabitants were left behind and only the tombstones were removed. This is not the first time I've heard this sort of thing happening, and it probably won't be the last. Many folks living in the neighborhood say the bodies are all still there. 1943, under the Works Progress Administration, a boys' club was built on the land where the cemetery used to be. If you examine the stonework, you'll notice it matches the walls that run around the southeast and north sides of Laredo College, which was formerly known as Fort McIntosh. The club had many activities for the kids of Laredo. On occasion, they would spend the night in the building. The boys and now girls who frequent the club say they hear somebody bouncing a basketball in the middle of the night. They also have said they hear people in the shower room when there's nobody there. Caretaker living in the club for 44 years, the structure has a second floor that he's used for the person in charge. The entire time he was there, along with his wife, he said he has never heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps the kids are just being spooked by the thought of playing games over the bodies of buried people, or maybe they're hearing things that only the young can perceive. On the west side of the building is an inside swimming pool. One of the lifeguards spotted a young boy in trouble. He was thrashing about trying to keep his head above water. The lifeguard could see the water around the boy, and it wasn't that deep. He was in the shallow end. There was nobody close by, so he dove straight in and grabbed the boy. Once the young boy was up on the side of the pool and calmed down, he said that someone had grabbed his legs and was trying to pull him under. The water wasn't deep, so the lifeguard could have seen anybody messing around. What could have happened that caused the boy to nearly drown in the shallow end? Something had pulled him under. Something no one could see. 7 blocks north from the boys' club is Park Street. If you follow it east for a few blocks, the street turns into Clark Boulevard. A man was driving to work at 3 a.m. As he was approaching the bridge over Zacate Creek, he spotted a young boy on the side of the street. The boy was dressed all in black. He looked a bit odd, being out so early and dressed all in one color. As the man was about to pass him, the boy vanished. He was there, and then he wasn't, in the blink of an eye. The sighting had taken place in the middle of the bridge over Zacate Creek. There was no place for anyone to hide. The boy didn't fade away. He was simply there, and then he blinked out of sight. The family's grandmother was at death's door. She was in the hospital, and the family was gathered around her. She was 95 years old, but looked more like she was in her 70s. As she looked around the room, her eyes focused on the far corner. "Who is that?" she asked. The family looked into the corner, but they saw nobody. "Who is who?" one asked. "That little girl sitting in the corner." The grandmother continued, looking at somebody that no one else could see. On many occasions, people who are about to pass on have asked about a person sitting in the corner of their hospital room. The person in question sits quietly, waiting. Some have seen an older man dressed in a white shirt and black pants. Others see a woman in a dress as if heading to a party. Then there are those that see a little girl. A lot of people have said that they've seen someone in their room just hours before death takes them away. Maybe it's kind of like a reaper, as in that TV show Dead Like Me. San Augustine Church was built in 1760. The building used to sit a bit farther north of its present location, and it faced the river. It started out as a wood frame structure, which was replaced by stone after a few years. In 1866, a new stone building was put up next to the original church. The cemetery was put in on the south side of the church. With the ever growing town around it, the San Augustine Church needed to expand as well, so the cemetery was dug up and the bodies sent to the Catholic Church on Saunders Street. Some of the bodies didn't make it. Over the years, people have heard sounds of someone crying. On occasion, it sounded as if several children were in distress. This was coming from several locations all at once. The search of the area never found anybody in need of help. When construction work was needed near the church, the workers uncovered a grave that had been missed during the disinterment. The body was that of a small child. The remains were carefully removed and reburied at a new cemetery. Since then, no one has reported hearing a crying spirit in the area. Joe was heading across town late one afternoon, heading to a family get together. It was Sunday at about 4 p.m. as he drove past the city cemetery and the Catholic cemetery. He was on Meadow Street. As he got to the intersection, the signal light was red, so he stopped to wait for the green. As Joe sat there, he thought about his grandfather who was buried right near the corner. Looking in that direction, Joe spotted a man standing under one of the trees in the cemetery. The man looked like anybody you would see in Laredo, except his clothing looked to be from a bygone era. The man was standing in the shade of one of the trees looking down at the ground. Joe looked closely and saw the man was wearing an old-style cowboy hat and work clothes. With a quick glance forward to check on the signal light, Joe looked back, but the man was gone. As Joe was pulling away, moving towards the intersection, he realized the cemetery is closed. All the gates are locked. Had somebody snuck into the cemetery by climbing the fence, it would be crazy to stand by the side of the street because the police drive by that area all the time and trespassers will go to jail. Joe grabbed his cell phone and called his wife to tell her he believed he had just seen the ghost of his grandfather. Then he called all of his other family members to tell them his grandfather was in that cemetery, but moving around. A Friday, August 2018. Alex had just gotten hired to work at the Laredo Public Library on McPherson. He was watching as everybody left the building for the day, and he noticed a woman with 3 kids walk into the ladies' room. One of the girls was very well dressed, as if she were on her way to church or a fancy party. Young girls do like to dress up on occasion. Shortly after, the woman came walking out the door, followed by 2 children. Alex watched the door, waiting for the third girl to come out and join her family. The woman left the building as if not knowing or caring that she was short one child. Alex, finally, not knowing what to do, asked one of the maintenance personnel to go see what had happened to the little girl. They went into the bathroom and then they came out. There's nobody in there. Alex knew he had seen the woman and 3 kids go in and only 2 kids come out. They all just kind of laughed about it, and somebody said, "It must have been a ghost." This is not something that is covered in the employee's handbook. On Highway 83 South, long before the Laredo College South Campus was built, there was a huge brick and cement house built on a hill. Some folks referred to this as the casino, thinking it was built as a gaming establishment. It did look somewhat auspicious from the highway. Working for the Border Patrol, we had access to the property. It was used for cattle mostly, and sometimes smuggling. On a few occasions, we went inside the house looking for anybody who might be hiding out. There were no doors, so anybody could have gotten in any time they wished. The inside was more impressive than the outside. The kitchen was huge, maybe 25 feet by 30 feet. There were brick arches built over the countertops. The countertops were all poured cement. All the rooms on the ground floor were bigger than anything found in a normal home, and none of them were bedrooms. There was a basement as well. Now, this was a kind of a spooky place to go because the stairs going down were steep and winding, leading to a hallway that was very narrow. If I recall correctly, the hallway was only about maybe 2.5 feet wide. You almost brushed both sides with your shoulders. Maybe about like that. The east end of the basement was a small room with glass blocks set into the ceiling. This would allow anybody standing there to look up and see who was standing at the front door. It would be from the feet up, but still an odd thing to have. Because the house was set on a hill, the west end of the basement hallway led out into the yard. The stairs going up to what should have been the second floor ended in a large landing. The stairs were wide and made from poured cement. Now, these stairs, they were about 5, maybe 6 feet across. There was nothing at the top of the stairs, just an attic space. It wasn't even really an attic, it was more of just a crawl space because the second floor hadn't been built. There were no bedrooms on the first floor, so they must have been planning on having them on the second. The house had been built by a family that owned dairy cattle. Instead of being a casino, it was a dairy. For some odd reason, the house was never finished. It was kind of creepy in the daytime, and at night, it was downright scary. A Border Patrol agent was checking the building to see if anybody was trying to sneak into the country. He walked around the building to what looked like a loading dock of sorts on the west side. Underneath this structure, somebody had carved a great big pentagram into the dirt. It was about the size you would expect to see during some kind of a ceremony. It was very intricate, and it was very much correctly done. This would have made an ideal location for some covert activity. It was some place that nobody could see from the highway or from any of the side streets. This land was acquired by the Laredo College, and the South Campus was built. Right near where the house used to stand is a two-story modern building. People have reported seeing a shadow being on the second floor. It stands in the alcove that leads into the bathroom. Those who see it say it looks about as big as a 6 or 8 year old girl. Peeking around the corner, she ducks back into the dark before the witness can get a good look at her, and then she vanishes. People have tried to find this shadow girl. The Laredo Paranormal Research Society spent many nights standing and sitting by the bathroom doors. They used all the fancy equipment and a psychic or two. The shadow refused to show up. The police academy is located at the South Campus. At night, the security camera has caught a shadow image coming in through the door. The campus police have reported seeing shadowy figures walking around between the buildings late at night. As the officer watches the shadow, it would simply fade away. People also report hearing voices in some of the buildings. Sometimes they hear footsteps and doors slamming. This has happened when there's only the cleaning staff inside. They almost always would quickly finish what they were doing and get the heck out of there. On the other side of the highway, just north from the college, there is an old cemetery. It is at Highway 83 in Obsidian. Put in back when this was all ranch land, the cemetery is old and a bit run down. Folks driving by have seen people standing on the side of the road as if they're about to cross the highway. As the vehicle goes by, the people on the side of the road fade away. This has been seen often by many different individuals. The folks living in Laredo back in the days before everyone owned a car would tell about seeing what looked like small campfires in the brush on the side of the road that would later become Highway 83 South. These fires were supposed to be located on top of treasure that had been buried years ago by bandits or rich folks who were trying to hide their valuables. Anytime one of these small fires was seen, it was custom to go and try digging up the area looking for hidden wealth. There are no stories of anyone ever finding anything or suddenly becoming rich, but there are a few old timers out there who still will stop and dig up the dirt looking for hidden treasure. In San Diego, California, yes, I'm getting a little away from Laredo. I never said there were ghost stories from Texas. These are just stories that have been told to me by people I've talked to. San Diego, California, 1852. Yankee Jim Robinson from Canada was found guilty of stealing a boat. He was hung in a vacant lot just one street away from the jail. In 1855, Thomas Whaley bought this piece of land where he planned on building his home. The house Whaley built was the first ever made from brick in California. The house had a general store on the ground floor with the family living upstairs. Shortly after moving in, their young son Thomas, who was 18 months old, died from scarlet fever. A few months later, the house caught fire, destroying the store. Thomas Whaley moved his family to San Francisco. In 1868, the Whaley family returned to San Diego, remodeled the house, and reoccupied it. The ground floor was now going to be used as a courthouse. Many of the businesses in this part of town began to move to the new section, leaving the Whaley house alone in the old section. As the years marched by, things changed around the house. There was a divorce, followed by a suicide. Many generations lived and died in this house. Since 1953, no one has lived in the Whaley house. It would seem all the people who died over the years have decided to stay on, haunting the house they'd called home. The house became a museum where folks can enjoy a ghost tour. Ivan was in San Diego, and he went to see the world-famous haunted house. This is not my nephew, Ivan. It's another Ivan that I met. He walked around the ground floor, seeing all the displays. Upstairs, he was admiring some photographs on the walls when he encountered a young woman dressed as if from the 1800s. She went on to describe all the items on display. She not only knew where and when the furnishings had been purchased, she knew who all the figures in the photographs were. Ivan was impressed by how much this young woman knew about the things in the museum. They spoke back and forth for about 10 minutes. Once he had seen everything in the house, Ivan headed towards the exit. As he was walking by the guard at the exit, the guard asked if he had enjoyed his visit to the Whaley house. Ivan mentioned how informative the tour guide upstairs had been. The guard gave him an odd look. He then proceeded to say that they did not have any tour guides in the museum, and nobody that worked there ever dressed in period costume. There was nobody in the Whaley house at the time other than Ivan and the guard. Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Even though it's after Christmas, keep in mind the season keeps running. You know that 12 days of Christmas thing? It's not just a song. I hope you enjoyed these stories. They are all taken from my books, either Paranormal Laredo or Paranormal Stories. If you have a good or even a bad story that you'd like to share, send it to strangethings@arkanasa.com. Arkanasa is spelled ARCANASA. Just think the ark, like as in Noah, and NASA.com. The stories can have anything to do with UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, or even just weird things that has happened. It doesn't have to be your personal story. It can be from your weird uncle or a family member or even someone you worked with. Send it to me and I'll whip it into some kind of a readable shape, and I'll send you back a draft so you can read it and say, yeah, that's what happened, or wait a minute, you got that part wrong. Once in a while, I've had a back and forth with a person with a story that we sent emails back and forth. I think the most was 16 times. Uh, I don't know what was the confusion, but every time I would send them the draft, they would change something. Like I said, 16 times I think it happened. If you like the show, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell people you don't even know. They should be listening to Strange Things. But remember, there's about 45 other podcasts out there called Strange Things now, so you might have to use the whole name. Until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.